Welcome. I'm Dr.T. Sumitha, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Sita Lakshmi Ramaswamy College. In this video, let us see the bipolar politics, one of the dominating features in international relations in the post-World War II period. Magenta defined international relations as power politics. I always admire, even wonder over the words of Magenta. It's a brilliant understanding and a simplified phrase. Yes, international relations is obviously power politics. We can identify the undercurrent of power politics in every sphere of international relations. As to the words of Magenta, the post-World War II period also witnessed the role of power politics. The post-World War II period, we see the transformation of the world into new international order. On one side, the emergence of the two new superpowers, USA and USSR. On the other side, the emergence of more new sovereign states due to decolonization. All these created a new international order, the three world order. This three world order in return brought the two great conflicts. One dominated the world politics for a period of half a century and ended with the collapse of the USSR, and the other still remained an unrealized one. In both the conflicts, the mantra of Magenta is witnessed. First, let us understand the three worlds. The countries of the West and the countries of the East in the Northern Hemisphere both are developed and rich countries, but ideologically opposed. This categorically formed the first and the second worlds. In course of time, they came under the leadership of the two new superpowers, the Western Bloc under USA and the Eastern Bloc under the USSR. On the other hand, the process of decolonization in Asia, Africa, Latin America added new sovereign countries to the world. These countries are politically young, socially, economically backward, and categorically forming the third world. This new order brought two conflicts in the post World War II period. The conflict of the rich countries, that is the first and the second worlds, technically termed as North-North conflict or East-West conflict, popularly known as bipolar politics, and later developed as Cold War. The third world countries demanded for a new international economic order to overcome the inequalities in the international economic activities. This conflict of the rich and the poor countries, technically termed as a North-South conflict, and it remained as an unrealized one, but diluted due to the emergence of a multipolar world. Let us see the background of emergence of the two superpowers and the power blocks. Europe formed the main stage of the World War II, met with total destruction. The former leaders of the world, the European powers, were in need of breathing time to reconstruct themselves. This created a vacuum in the international leadership. This vacuum was filled by the new powers, the USA and the USSR. In the beginning of the 20th century, USA and USSR emerged politically, economically strong countries in the world. The 20th century leaders of both the countries not only shaped the policies of their country, but also the international politics. America shed its traditional isolation and followed the footsteps of the European powers in imperialism and interference and emerged as the advocate of liberal ideas and capitalism, which gradually started to lead the non-communist countries in the world. On the other hand, Russia, which transformed into a communist country in the early 20th century, expanded its ideology and emerged as United Soviet Socialist Republic. Communism started to spread in the East Europe, which alarmed the West. The non-communist nations, West Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, led by USA, the advocates of capitalism, looked down upon communism as subversive movement and called themselves as free world. Both the blocs called their ideology as democratic in real sense. Soviet criticized US policy as imperialism, and US criticized communism as subversive. Started as a natural struggle between them, developed into a strong ideological war. It divided the entire world into two blocks, creating political, military, and economic allies. It was an era of neither peace nor war, but the tension, hotness of the war prevailed. This bipolar politics remained as a dominating element for nearly half a century and impacted every aspect, every part of the world, either directly or indirectly, and ended with the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Relations between US and Soviet Union strained even prior to the World War II, but categorized as Cold War only in 1947. The term Cold War was first used by Bernard Baruch, an American statesman, towards the attitude and behavior of the two countries. But it was frequently used and popularized by Professor Walter Lippmann only in 1947. Upon the nature of the war, there prevailed constant conflict and strife, suspicion and mistrust, antagonism and hostility, perpetuated without armed confrontation. Both the antagonists adopted all means other than war to weaken each other. It was not armed, but diplomatic and ideological war, fought by the means of political propaganda. That's why this war, even called as a propaganda war. In short, it can be deemed as intense diplomatic, political, economic, and ideological struggle, but short of armed belligerence and clash. It was a diplomatic struggle between the superpowers in maintaining the supremacy of their ideology, that is, democracy and totalitarian communism. The former capitalist countries led by the US, and the latter the communist countries led by the Soviet Union. Thus, existence of division, distrust, suspicion between the power blocks in general, but between the superpowers particular existed. The Cold War, actually not a war, but the hotness of such natural war prevailed. On the atmosphere, superpowers engaged in military preparedness, arms race, pacts, alliance, creating sphere of influence and polarizing the world. This character of the Cold War is more or less arbitrary in nature, acted and reacted to each other. Coming to the evolution of the Cold War, it can be classified into various phases. The period of high conflict alternated with a mix of conflict and adjustment, to be followed again by phase of tension and hostility, which yielded to the phase of detente, and in turn suffered a setback and capitulated to another phase of strained relationship. Truman, who became President of America after Franklin D. Roosevelt, he shed the policies of Roosevelt and he initiated the policy of containment to check the spread of communism. For this, he go on creating military pacts with the Atlantic countries that come into the existence of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to check the spread of communism in the western part of the European country. He was lavish in funding for the reconstruction of the Western Europe through the Marshall Plan, for which he stopped the Lend-Lease Act, which was previously signed during the period of World War, which also extended supplies to the Russia. To stop supplies to Russia, he stopped the Lend-Lease Act. Instead, he created the Marshall Plan, which limited its supplies only to the European power to check spread of communism in all means. For this, he formulated the Truman Doctrine. Through Truman Doctrine, any country can avail the military aid of America if they were compelled to follow any political ideas against their wish. As like the Western Bloc, the Eastern Bloc also started to strengthen its ties with through military pact and also economic pact. The military pact and the economic pact popularly came to be called as the Warsaw Pact and the Comintern, which spread the communist ideology and also the communist ties. Russia also started to ally with the neighboring countries. Fortunately, one of the biggest Asian country, China, also become a communist country. This strengthened the powers of the communist world. Here, we can see the alliance of Stalin with Mao, the leader of communist China. This created tension, distress, polarizing, and arms race. Regarding the origin and causes of the Cold War, scholars differ in opinion. Some scholars believe the seeds of Cold War sown with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917. Some scholars believe that the sign of Cold War is visible little before the World War II. The widely prevalent version is soon after the Second World War. It is difficult to accept any one view because each has some elements of truth. Regarding the causes of the Cold War, the scholars also differ in their opinion. According to the Orthodox view, it was believed that Soviet Union alone responsible for the Cold War. But in 1960s, there emerged a revisionist view, according to which the US alone was believed as responsible for the Cold War. But the objective views state that both the US and Soviet Union are equally responsible for the Cold War. Scholars of Orthodox view argue that Soviet alone responsible for the Cold War. To strengthen their argument, they pointed certain events that happened in the post-World War period. Russia's unwillingness to allow democratic elections in the territories liberated from the Nazis. And it started to superimpose communist governments in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Albania, East Germany, forming the East European countries. Soviet also pressured on Greece and Turkey by supporting subversive activities of the communists there. It was pointed by the Orthodox viewers that Soviet refused to withdraw its Red Army from Iraq, whereas Britain and USA withdrew their forces. Besides, Soviet Union also destroyed German industries and transferred costly German machines to Russia as reparation, which adversely affected the already ruined German economy. Britain and USA had to spend huge amounts for the German economic recovery. In addition, Soviet Union also refused to contribute for the reconstruction of the regions outside Soviet control. Russia also maintained a large army even after the end of the war. It created a great suspicion in the minds of the West. Selfish and obstructive behavior of the Soviet Union in the UNO, the newborn international organization, also one of the major reasons for the Cold War. The decision to solve the crisis situation brought by the Western power in the Security Council was surely vetoed by the Soviet Union or the Eastern Bloc. This created a great misunderstanding between the two powers. As discussed earlier, Cold War was clearly a propaganda war. Both the powers criticized the ideologies of the others and established there as one of the best in the world. It was unacceptable for US, the anti-US propaganda created by the Soviet Union. US feared the propaganda created by Soviet Union as a destruction to their system of economic and political life. Here you can see some of the posters created by Soviet Union reflecting the anti-US propaganda. In these posters, Soviet Union criticized the democratic ideas, which is the biggest lie in the world. Orthodox scholars also accuse Stalin's suspicious nature that aggravated the Cold War. It was unable for the Western power to convince him about their good intention and the reason for the delay in opening up of the second front against Germany. Stalin abruptly rejected Allies' explanation. He held that the Western powers made deliberate attempt of world's two leading capitalist powers to destroy both the two major ideological opponents, that is the Nazi and the communists. The Orthodox viewers also argue that Russians were warmongers. The predecessors of Bolshevik revolution were expansionists, and they built a huge empire for Russia. America played a major role in checking the further expansion of Soviet Union. This argument was strengthened by unwillingness of Soviet Union to withdraw its Red Army from Eastern and the Central Europe even after the end of the World War II. All these arguments of the Orthodox strengthened the view that Soviet perceived as a military rival, ready to invade the Western Europe and acquire more new satellites. It was a great apprehension of the Americans. Soviet Union become a great threat to peace as well as to their own foreign position. A new school of thought emerged in America in 1960. It challenged and revised the Orthodox view on various grounds. Hence, it came to be called as a revisionist school. It accused US more than the Soviet Union. The revisionists point out wartime experience as a great reason for creating misunderstanding between the two countries. Instead of removing doubts, it only aggravated. The US delay in sending Lend-Lease supplies to the Soviet Union and its delay to open up the Second Front all created suspicion in the minds of Stalin. He doubted US purposefully delaying the Lend-Lease supply and opening the Second Front. He suspected that US wanted the Russians and the Germans to destroy each other. US also failed to inform the wartime strategy as per the agreement. It informed the UK but it didn't inform properly the Soviet Union about the war strategy against Japan. The use of atomic bomb against Japan created a great misunderstanding. It was considered as a ploy to prevent Russian involvement in the Pacific peace settlement. Russia held that the use of deadly weapon atom bomb was unnecessary because Japan could have been defeated by the traditional weapons as like Italy and Germany because the war in the mainland have come to an end. The only power that exists is Japan. It can be defeated by the traditional weapon instead of using the atom bomb. Hence, it was considered as a threat against Russia to check expansion in the East Europe, Middle East, and the Pacific region. In this picture, you can see the little boy and the fat man manufactured by America in the Manhattan Project. In the middle, you can see the Bolshevik Revolution that happened in 1917-18, which was interfered by US. In this picture, you can see the Allied power, the Western Front and the Eastern Front. The Western Front jointly held by USA, UK, and France. And the Eastern Front, it was singly handled by Soviet Union. Soviet Union was in dire necessity of supplies from United States through the Lend-Lease Act. It felt that America was purposefully delaying the supply to be sent to the Second Front. Stalin suspected that America purposefully delayed because America want Russia and Germany to destroy each other. Suspicion started to increase in the post-war affairs also, which aggravated the misunderstanding between the two powers. For example, US supported previous Nazi collaborators in the American occupied countries, notably Italy. It pressurized Soviet Union to free elections in the areas vital to Soviet national security, that is in Poland. During the wartime, Soviet Union get aid from the US through Lend-Lease Act. But after the defeat of Germany, it was abruptly stopped by the President Truman. Soviet Union was in dire necessity of aid from US for the reconstruction of the war-ravaged Russia. The Western powers criticized and even opposed Soviet Union demand of reparation. Soviet Union considered this as a big insult and it suspected that the West never want Russia to be stronger or reconstructed. And US also gradually redesigned its plan. It nullified the Lend-Lease Act and passed a Marshall Plan through which the European Recovery Program was introduced and it ensured the non-participation of the Soviet Union. Breaking of the Yalta Agreement. Roosevelt agreed Soviet Union can install friendly governments on our western boundaries. Therefore, inappropriate to expand in the East Europe in violation of any agreement. Soviet Union, even from Napoleonic War up to the World War II, always been attacked by the West. Therefore, it was her interest to have friendly regimes in East Europe. This was recognized by Churchill and Roosevelt in Yalta. Let us see some of the counter arguments established by the revisionists over the orthodox view. Orthodox held that Russia was imposing authoritarian communist government in East Europe, but it was subjected by the revisionists. East European countries never ever had democratic governments before. Hence, Russia against democracy was baseless. They also established that it is fun to speak America as protector of democracy in the world because several times America helped dictatorial regimes in various parts of the world, such as Franco regime in Germany, coup in Chile, undemocratic government of General Noel of Cambodia, military dictatorship of Pakistan during the period of Ayub Khan, Yahya Khan, Ziaul Haq, and supporting the monarchy government in Saudi Arabia. These are all the few examples established by the revisionists questioning the America's leadership as a protector of democracy in the world. Regarding the activities of Soviet Union in Greece, Turkey, Persia, Orthodox viewed Russia want communist government, but it was rejected by the revisionists as baseless because in Persia, Soviet Union want only little oil concession. As like in Turkey, it wanted the accession for Black Sea to Mediterranean through the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. In Greece, Russia never encouraged directly or indirectly communist activities in accordance with the October Agreement with Britain in 1944. Hence, the criticism over Russia was rejected by, considered as baseless by the revisionists. The revisionists argue that Truman was more responsible for both the misunderstanding and also aggravation of the Cold War. If Roosevelt might have continued, the Cold War might not have been happened. But Truman, even as a senator, he was against communism. After becoming president of America, he practiced the policy of anti-communist and also he created the anti-communist feeling and a stiff policy towards communism. He called all these ideologies, that is communism, fascism, Nazism, as evil ideologies and had to be nipped in its bud. He was largely influenced by his bureaucrats like Berenice Kennan and also James Baruch, who were the advocates of the anti-communist policies. And they had a strong conviction against the expansion of Soviet influence in East Europe. And they want to check at its bud. And again, they insisted that the US should assert itself against the rising tide of communism. Apart from this, high US defense officials and generals were also wanted some sort of tension to persist even after the war. So they may have sway over. So what they felt was they may have sway over administration. Similarly, war industry used to lobby its to prevail upon the US administration to pursue the above policy so as to keep their plot boiling. In the later period, there emerged the objective view in which it was believed that both US and USSR equally responsible for the Cold War. Misperception played a great role. Cold War had its root not in conflicting interests but in mutual misunderstanding. Each party considered their own actions as virtuous and those of others as malicious. These mirror images resulted conflict and distress. Both had same perception of each other. They are aggressors. They arm for war. We arm for peace. They intervene on others' territory to expand influence, whereas we do the same to preserve and protect others. Mutual antagonism another factor. Cold War was product of mutual antagonism. Origin of Cold War indicate mistrust and fear. We cannot say it was a response of one peaceful nation to the aggression of another, or snapping of wartime alliance exclusively by one. Instead, Cold War is outcome of mutual fear and suspicion. Once it set in motion, conflict developed, fed up itself, bred of hostile interaction. Economic interests form an important part in this war. Western Bloc favored capitalist economy, promoting individual initiative and enterprises. In return, the Eastern Bloc were the socialist economy and controlled by the state. The Western countries are developed countries and their development were nourished by the exploitation of the poor countries of the world. If more new nations become communist, naturally capitalist market would shrink and the scarcity of raw material might have happened. Hence, it is the interest of the West to keep world free of communist domination, and the economic interest form the integral part of the war. Likewise, the Soviet Union and its ally wanted to prevent the capital's penetration into the third world. It hoped that increased shrinkage of exploitation of the third world by the capitalist would ultimately lead to the doom of capitalism. Law of nature. It's quite interesting to see the law of nature as one of the major factors for the Cold War. Historians' opinion that the victorious always fought after victory. Example. After Napoleonic War, the victorious fought among themselves over the distribution of the spoils of war. Similar thing happened in the Austro-Persian War. France and Russia fought among themselves. As like even after the World War One. Hence, it's quite natural the victorious powers of World War II fought to uphold the law of nature. Some other important reasons also pointed out by the historians. The power vacuum concept. The emergence of power vacuum invited clash between the two new superpowers. Pressures exerted on the foreign policies by the interest groups within each society also created a great impact in this war. The shift in the climate of domestic opinion on international issues also formed the major reason for this war. Innovation in weapon technology and the shift in the strategic balance they introduced and the role played by the military planners in each society also fermented the conflict. From the analysis of the above points, we can come to a conclusion that neither US nor Soviet Union solely responsible for the initiation of this war. Both equally responsible as both were victims of their images and expectations. Each threatened, each had solid reasons to suspect each other. Hence, we can come to a conclusion that there are multiple reasons for the origin of this Cold War. Thank you for listening to my video. Thank you all.